Our major announcement today is that I have vetoed both of the ordinances that passed at last Tuesday's amendment, or last Tuesday's assembly meeting. One of them, basically 2014-74, repealed AO 37, and the second one, AO 2014-80, the S1 version, I vetoed that as well. It was purported to be a compromise from AO 37, but we've put together a matrix that you'll all get copies of that show all the differences between AO 37 and the newly passed ordinance, and quite frankly, it really doesn't even resemble a compromise. All the major tenets of AO 37 are not contained in the new ordinance, and so I was not able to support it. So veto message has been conveyed down to the clerk's office just a few moments ago, so that's officially how we do it. We give notice to the clerk, who then disseminates to the assembly, and then of course the ability to meet with you folks and let you know that we've taken this action and answer any questions you might have. Yes?
I know you alluded last week about just why you felt like this wasn't much of a compromise.
Yeah.
ADS, can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, and again, you'll get a matrix that shows all the differentiations, but just to give you a few of them, for example, AO 37 did not allow public employees the right to strike. As I've mentioned before, the Supreme Court has ruled in one case that's a precedent-setting case that public employees do not have the right to strike because the public should never be denied a service because management and labor in the public sector are in disagreement, particularly since some of those services cannot be provided by someone else, whether it's water and wastewater or the transit system, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that we were trying to do, of course, in AO 37 was allow for managed competition so that we can offer to the public the best services at the best price. That's not included in the new ordinance. We wanted to standardize benefit plans. That's eliminated in the new ordinance. Management rights, including determining staffing levels, schedule levels, shifts, are typically the function of management in any business, and it certainly should be the function of the management team that we have at the city. That's not included in the new ordinance. For example, the limiting of performance incentive programs, where we found way too often the incentives are great, but the performance minimal to achieve those incentives, is not included in the new ordinance. One of the things that was important to us too, in fact we just included it in the new IBEW contract, was eliminating signatory language, which means a firm that wants to do work for the city does not have to pay a stipend, a fee to the IBEW in order to perform certain work. That's not included in the new ordinance. So really, I mean, just amongst those 5 or 6 items, those were really the heart of AO 37, and they are not included in the new ordinance. So it really is not a compromise and does not represent anything resembling what we accomplished with AO 37 and all the hard work that went into that ordinance.
Are you concerned that if this does get to voters and they repeal it, that there won't be the ability to change for 2 years any of these labor laws, or did you take that into consideration at all when you made your decision?
Well, I mean, all that happens is it goes back to AO 37 as it existed before, but it doesn't preclude the ability to, successfully negotiate as we've been able to do. In 7 of the 9 contracts, we've been successful negotiating the terms and tenets of AO 37 in virtually every contract. A little bit different language in some or the other, but for the most part, we've been successful. And as I said all along, the purpose of AO 37 was not for this administration. It was to prevent future administrations from doing what they did in 2008, when the Begich administration rushed through last-minute contracts that were probably the richest contracts in Anchorage history in the midst of the worst recession in 70 years. AO 37 was designed to prevent that happening with future administrations. So if it does somehow the referendum is successful in November, what I think the public can hope for at that stage is they continue to elect good, strong mayors who are going to look out for the taxpayers' interests.
You don't feel it would tie their hands particularly?
No, again, because the law is suspended right now, yet even while suspended, we've been successful in negotiating contracts with these terms contained within. So it would be up to a future administration to also negotiate tough and make sure that the contracts are fair to the employees, but just as much fair to the people that pay these contracts.
Do you think the best way to deal with this city matter is by putting it on the state ballot, or is it just kind of the last choice?
Well, on an issue of this importance, it's never a bad thing, I don't think, to let the public weigh in. And this is clearly a hot button issue, one that 20,000 people signed a petition to put it on the ballot. And I think those folks will now have a chance to vote, as will all of the people that I hear from on a daily basis that have asked us to continue to negotiate on their behalf with good, strong, fair terms. And a lot of those people will come out and vote as well. So again, on an important issue, one of citywide consequence, never a bad idea to let the public weigh in sometimes.
So as of now, these vetoes, provided they don't override them, it goes back to a suspended AO 37 is the law of the land technically
Right.
until we get into the November election.
Correct.
And you had said earlier that the new version gives public employees, non-essential public employees, the right to strike. That was one of your sticking points?
Well, the only public employees now who do not have the right to strike unless you negotiate otherwise are police and fire. They're prohibited from striking. And other essential employees, in fact, we found when we were in litigation with, I think it was the plumbers and pipe fitters, that some of their capacity is of such important nature that the court ruled that they could not go on strike as well. So I think they call them, D Class 1 employees, or Nancy? B. There you go. So, anybody else? Questions?
So if this goes through to the ballot, it will be in the November election,
Yes.
Are there any special costs associated with putting that on there?
Very minimal. At first, it was estimated that it might take several $100,000 to print a separate ballot, have separate poll workers, but the clerk and the elections division manager, Gail Funumiami, they've worked it out where it actually can be printed without additional cost and without additional staffing. So it'll be part of the ballots that they're printing anyway. It'll be an additional item on there, just for Anchorage voters, obviously. So the rest of the state won't be weighing in on this issue.
And do you have plans to convince voters that they should be, voting in favor? Well, see, voting to have it AO 37 stand as the law. How do you plan to convince voters that that's the right thing to do?
Well, it's not my purview to do that. You can't use the auspices of the mayor to, try and convince voters. What I can do, though, is I can just simply hand out information. In fact, we ran some informative radio spots last year when the ordinance was being considered that just basically said, here is what AO 37 does, and didn't advocate one way or the other on you should vote or you shouldn't vote. And so, but a factual campaign is allowed, and so whether or not we do that or not, we don't have near the resources that I think the unions might possess. So, in terms of getting information out, we'll do our best to make sure there's an informed electorate, but certainly don't have any plans to advocate a yes or no vote.
And the money that was already appropriated for this, when the city thought it would cost around $400,000, is there anything that's going to be, any plans what that's going to be used for?
Yeah.
I know Demboski had a couple
Yeah,
ideas.
her ordinance passed last Tuesday, which basically reappropriates some of the money from the assembly budget and will allow us to accelerate the hiring and training of paramedics. We're short a few paramedics. We're able to accommodate that with just some creative shifting of staffing in our various fire departments. But long term, we recognize that we do need to increase that staffing level. So they did approve shifting funds from the assembly budget into the fire department budget. So that process is ongoing right now.
And Mr. Mayor, now that we've kind of reached this point, is there anything you think you could have done differently with regards to this law and the way it unfolded, or are you happy with how it all unfolded? Or?
Well, anything controversial is never easy, and certainly there's no lack of opinions on what could have happened or should have happened. But the bottom line is what we looked at was we wanted to make sure, since the labor law had not been visited in a quarter century, that we took a holistic approach at the labor law to make sure that, again, going forward, the parameters of what could be negotiated were well defined, and at the same time, again, would lead to contracts that are both fair to the employees and fair to the public that pays those contracts. And I think we accomplished that. There's been talk about the law was developed in secret. Well, almost any piece of legislation is internal work product until you lay it on the table. At that point, it becomes a public document. And if you look at the public process behind AO 37, 5 assembly 2-hour work sessions, more than any law ever and before the history of the Assembly. 20 hours of public testimony. We rewrote the law several times based on the comments we got from the unions, from Assembly members, and from the public. So the version that passed was actually, I think, the S2 version, which means there were several rewrites of it. So we took all that public information, all the sage advice we got from the unions on how to make language better, and incorporated it into the final version. So I really don't have any qualms about how the process worked, because it was an extremely public process once it was laid on the table, and that's when the public process starts, not when you're with your executive team working on internal work product. So in fact, as I mentioned at the Assembly meeting the other night, I was in several debates over the course of the year, and on one particular one on Charles Wolforth's show on public radio, you know, I went point by point by point through what AO 37 accomplished, and asked my opponents on the other side of the table, which one of these things does not make common sense? And quite frankly, they couldn't respond that any of them didn't make common sense. They just kept going back to the fact they thought it was developed in secret. And again, it was a very public process once the item became public as a laid on the table document. So I really don't have any qualms about how the process worked. What else? Going once, going twice?